in August camp and had a lot of responsibility there. And then right after that, she hiked the John Muir Trail. So, wow, I guess August camp was that exhausting. You had to get away and do a good backpack to relax. So, Margot, how long have you been part of the AMC?
I've actually been part of the AMC since uh, around the early 90s, and initially I was very active in the Boston chapter as a rock climber.
Okay. Any other positions you've held other than with August Camp?
In the AMC,
Yes.
uh, no, I'm a leader for the Western Mass chapter.
Okay. With that, Margot, I'll let you tell us about the John Muir Trail and anything else that you find that is appropriate for this evening.
All right, thanks, Phil. Okay, so first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me to the meeting. It's really nice to see so many friends. I think some of you came so that you could see me in person and make sure that I really truly survived the trip. Um, but this also has been a really nice opportunity to review the pictures from my hike and to think about all that went into making it possible to do the entire trail. And before I start, there are just a couple of things that'll make it easier for you to understand what I'm talking about. And the big thing is that I want to tell you who my trail family was. I started off as a solo hiker, but around day five, by day five, I had encountered three other people who are about, well, let's just say I could be their grandmother. And they were Jake and Sky Taylor. They're a couple in their mid 20s, and they're currently living in San Diego. And she is a labor and delivery nurse, and he's a former wildfire fighter, which was actually it was kind of nice to have a firefighter along, seeing as we encountered a lot of smoke and things like that. And then the other person was Allie Singleton, who's a 24-year-old graduate student at Stanford, and we had a wonderful time together. And one of the joys of retirement has been having the time to do longer backpacks over the past few summers. And it was a friend actually in my school who got me thinking about the John Muir Trail a few years ago when we were both awaiting words from trail lotteries. I was waiting for my permit for the Wonderland Trail, and she was waiting for the John Muir Trail. And after 3 years, she's still waiting. So just a little introduction to the John Muir Trail. It was completed in 1938, and the trail officially runs from Yosemite Valley to the summit of Mount Whitney. And for a portion of its length, it is shared with the Pacific Crest Trail. And unlike a good portion of the Appalachian Trail and most of the Long Trail, there are very few road crossings. So you're very committed once you're on the trail, and food supply can be a special challenge. It traverses 7 different federal lands, and they all have different rules and different permitting processes that can impact your entry point. The trail climbs 46,000 feet over its length and descends 38,000 feet as it makes its way over 10 passes, 9 of them over 10,000 feet. Some a lot more than 10,000 feet. And you must have a permit to begin the trail at any point in Yosemite National Park. Entry requirements from other points depend on the federal jurisdiction that it's in. And when I applied last year, I could submit my application 183 days, I think it was, before the first day I planned to hike. I could then stay in the trail lottery for up to 21 days if I wanted to, But because of my summer plans, I only could be in the lottery for 5 days. And for the first 4 days, I got rejection emails. And I almost deleted the email on the 5th day thinking, oh, it's just another rejection. But in fact, it was the email saying, you have a permit. But the lottery process, for anybody who's interested, the lottery process for the coming summer has changed. And there are many good sources of information about the lottery. But do not rely on anything that's on Facebook, because Facebook is full of misinformation. And I also had to get this California campfire permit that you see on the screen. So when I got my permit at the end of February, I immediately went into overdrive. Those who know me wouldn't be surprised by that, to gather all the information that I could. And given the COVID restrictions at the time, I knew that I couldn't expect transportation to and from the trailheads, access to Yosemite Valley, and food supply options to be operating normally. That was a little nerve-wracking. Throughout the spring, those were constantly changing. But I forged ahead and I started hiking with an increasingly heavy pack. And in fact, some of you at August Camp can remember, I was carrying a pack and then I decided to change to a different pack. And I auditioned, I call it auditioning food and auditioning clothing, to make sure everything was that I liked everything that I was going to be taking with me. And my fitness routine also got amped up with really thinking about exercises to target my core, back, my legs, and my ankles. And one of the other really important muscles I always say for a long distance hike is to exercise the muscle between your ears, because the mental preparation is really important when you think about, what am I going to do if such and such a situation happens? So the first thing that I ordered was a set of really good trail maps, as well as the John Muir Trail has excellent trail guides. There's this woman named Elizabeth Wenck. I think she's hiked the trail something like 24 times. She's an expert in the flora, the fauna, the geology, everything about the trail. So there are great resources. And it was really helpful to lay out the map sections and to begin to visualize what the hike would be like. So you can see the hike started, I have it set up there north to south, that I started, you start and you go kind of northeast for 3 days before you finally get to start going south. And as I got deeper into my planning, I marked the trail with different colored tabs to show a tentative route and important points. In this particular section, you can see there are red markers, and that was where I thought I might camp along the way. The yellow indicated a pass, and the blue indicated a resupply point. And I added the green markers when I got home to show where I actually did camp. And I was really surprised how close I came to my original plan. But part of this planning was also the yellow, seeing where the yellow was for the passes was really important, because I always wanted to be camped close to a pass where I could get over the pass early in the day. And I thought really carefully about what was going into my pack. For about 3 months, there was an ongoing pile in the corner of my living room of possible items, most of which were rejected. But everything got tested. My sleeping system and tent were different from what I'd used in the past, and I wanted to make sure that they were up to the task. I had hiked the long trail last summer, so I knew the equipment from that trek had really done well. And that was a really big help. So the big difference on this hike was that I had to carry a bear canister, and I decided to splurge, and I bought a super lightweight, but not small, Wild Ideas Barricade. It was a great purchase. I could fit a lot into it, and it also had smooth sides, so I could have fun with stickers. Not a stitch of clothing went into the pack that didn't have a purpose and that had been fully trail tested, because your clothes don't fit the same way under a pack. And I will say every item of clothing I had with me got worn. And many people, there's a lot of talk about lightweight shoes and lightweight this and that. And so many people wear trail runners, but they don't work for my elderly feet. And in the spring, I found these boots called Trail Venture, Topo Trail Venture boots, mid boots that are very lightweight. They fit my feet perfectly. And I never had so much as a hot spot on my feet in this whole trek. And so it began. I actually arrived in Yosemite on the 4th of August. I arrived a few days early so that I could acclimatize to the change in elevation. And my permit allowed me a free night in the backpackers campground, but I had to reserve 2 other nights, so which I did about 2 months or 3 months before that. As soon as the national park, as soon as Yosemite opened up for reservations, I had 3 browsers going at once to make sure that I actually got a campsite when they started up taking reservations that morning. And it was really nice to hike. Let me see here. I hiked all around Yosemite Valley. I think that I figured out that I hiked close to 30 miles over those 3 days, all around the valley, back and forth from the campground to into the village. And I also climbed up to Nevada Falls, which is several thousand feet higher. And this actually, I did a different route from what I would be doing when I actually started the hike. And then the last day, before I left, I had to visit the ranger and get the spiel that the ranger does, and had to prove that I had the right kind of beer canister for the trail. And I was also presented with a wag bag, because all solid waste, when you are climbing Mount Whitney, there are probably about a stretch of about 15 miles of trail where no human waste can be left behind. You have to pack it out. So finally on August 7th was day one, and I did a short hike, 5.5 miles, up past Nevada Falls, to the backpackers camp in Little Yosemite Valley. And my permit only allowed me to go that far on the first day. That's the way that they kind of ration the number of people heading out on the trail. So I was allowed to go as far as Little Yosemite Valley. And initially I was a little disappointed, but looking back, I'm really glad it was a perfect way to start that hike. So I started up the official John Muir Trail. This is very near Nevada Falls, and I think one of the reasons I wanted to show you, I love this section of trail actually. I've been on it a few times, but you can see in the middle of it that there's asphalt. So you're a few miles up the trail, and all of a sudden you come on asphalt. And I found the same was true in Yosemite Valley, that there are a lot of sections of trail in the valley that at one time were all paved over. And they've discontinued that, but I don't know what their thinking was. It must have been in the 70s about paving everything. So this was near Nevada Falls, and this was the tent that I used. This is my Gossamer Gear 1. I had actually won it in a giveaway last spring, so I tested it out. I liked it, and it's held up with my trekking poles. It weighs 1.5 pounds. It's a fabulous little tent. So the next day was a more usual backpacking day, going over Cathedral Pass, and started up early in the morning. And this was very memorable because all of these bushes that you're seeing ahead of you were full of very sharp spines. And the trail really, you were almost wading through them. They were so thick. And at one point, you can't see your feet. And at one point, my toe caught under a root, and I went headlong into the spines with a lot of holes in my hands as a result. Very dramatic. It was the only fall in the whole trip. And then there were these really wonderful moments of approaching this peak that's called, not surprisingly, Digit Peak. It reminds me a little bit of Index Peak at Pilot Creek, for those of you who were at August Camp out in Wyoming. And then you come around the peak and here's this wonderful broad side. And I just love things like that. This is Long Meadow. And I found this wonderful rock to sit on to have lunch. Now, on the way up Cathedral Pass, I'd actually been kind of leapfrogging. There was a guy that I'd stop, he'd go ahead, he'd stop, I'd go ahead. And at one point I asked him, I thought something had happened. I asked him if he was okay. He said no, he was waiting for his wife, and that was that. And so I stopped to have lunch, and I was sitting on this really nice rock, and this woman went by with this very psychedelic kind of, I don't know, not PC perhaps, but a coolie type hat. And I kind of scared her when I said hello. But what I didn't realize is that was Jake and Sky Taylor, who I would meet a little further up the trail, who would become hiking buddies for really the rest of the trip. So here is such a good example of the amount of wear that the trail gets. Here you have a trough that has actually been worn into the rock by people and horses. And the rock in Yosemite, it looks really hard, but a lot of it is really quite friable. But I think this is such a good example of the stresses that are being put on some of these trails. And finally, I arrived at Cathedral Lake, which this picture shows 2/3 of it. These pictures show 2/3 of it. A wonderful lake, very typical of all the alpine lakes that I encountered. They're just amazing, and they're so big. And they weren't actually, this summer, they weren't atrociously cold. So my third morning dawned clear. There was only a small amount of residual smoky haze. Throughout the trips, mornings were my favorite time. I was fresh, the air was fresh, and I always woke up with this real intense curiosity about what the day was going to bring. So I was really pleased to be able to move right along, descending to Tuolumne Meadows, where I picked up my first resupply box. Unfortunately, the grill next door, which was reputed to have really good food, was closed because of COVID. And it was at Tuolumne where Jake Taylor and I had our first real conversation. He was picking up their resupply, and it just took a while, and we just sat there and chatted during that time. And I continued on, finally heading south up Lyell Canyon. And you have to go 4 miles, a minimum of 4 miles beyond Tuolumne before you're allowed to camp. And I was so interested by the course of this river. And of course, this was a very low water year. And I could only imagine what this is like when it's really full of rushing water. And what I was supposed to be looking for, and you can see it on the left side of this picture, there's a rock fall. And that's the point you're supposed to look for that says, okay, it's okay to camp from this point on up the canyon. And I was also trying to figure out where Donahue Pass, which was my objective for the next day, where it was, so that I could decide how far up the canyon I wanted to go. So day 4, I was looking for that high point of Donahue Pass, and I arose bright and early on the 4th day. And there was a real sense of anticipation about getting over this first big pass of the trip. And the low water level allowed for rock hopping. In a normal water year, I would have been fording a lot of these streams, but I was able, with one exception, I was able to just use rocks to get over all these streams. And at first it was kind of hard to discern exactly where the pass was, but then I started to see little stick figures, the sticks hopping around on the horizon, and that was when I knew, oh, that's where the trail goes. There I am at the top of the pass. One of the things that was really interesting I thought about these passes is that so many of them had beautiful alpine lakes at the top. And it was still early in the day when I started down the pass, and it quickly became clear that I was going to be able to get much further than I had anticipated. And I encountered Jake and Sky just below Island Pass, and where we had lunch together. And this is below Island Pass. We're at 10,000 Island Lake, really another really beautiful lake, where they encouraged me to think about heading all the way to Garnet Lake. And it was really good advice. I was tired by the time I got to Garnet Lake, but I had ended up getting a whole day ahead of myself in my planning. And that was huge in feeling that I had some wiggle room with how long I had to do the hike. So leaving Garnet Lake the next morning, I hiked around the lake and started up an unexpectedly long climb. I clearly hadn't read the guide well enough to know that this was going to be a big climb. And I went up and I kept looking down and seeing Garnet Lake and looking down and seeing Garnet Lake. I thought that lake would never disappear from my view. But I had a goal of getting to Red's Meadow, where there's a resort, a backcountry resort of sorts, where I knew there'd be some real food, and I also had a resupply, and I could get a shower there. And then my pace picked up even further when I encountered a hiker who told me that I needed to get Red's early if I wanted a chocolate milkshake. And I really wanted a chocolate milkshake, and that was all I needed to really hoof it down the trail. I went past Devil's Post Pile, so you can see here this is a very remarkable place with these basalt columns that are both lying in heaps horizontally as well as vertically. It's very, very dramatic. And that evening at Red's, Jake and Sky introduced me to Allie, and the four of us decided that we would hike together the next day. And so our little tramily was born. So leaving Red's was the point of committing to the full trail. From that point on, there were no direct road access points. And my next resupply was 5 days away, and I was feeling pretty good. And I was really happy to have some hiking companions. And that first day, we hiked pretty fast. But we also took some nice long breaks and put our feet in the streams and just hung out. And it was a hot day, and it turned slightly thundery as it progressed. And at one point, we encountered a ranger who warned us about an aggressive bear in the area where we were headed. And that was all it took for the four of us to decide that we would camp in close proximity to each other when we got to Purple Lake. But neither the thunderstorms nor the bear showed up. So the next morning I started out, I was solo since we all had kind of different goals for the day. And the trail wound around Lake Virginia, which is truly one of the most beautiful of the high alpine lakes. And then it descended, I think it's about 1,000 feet, quite steeply into Tully Hole, which was, once you got down there, was really quite lovely. This is some fireweed that's actually gone by, and it was just so gorgeous against the water. And so as soon as I got down to the stream, it very quickly crossed the stream and began the climb up to Silver Pass. And at Squaw Lake, while I lunched, a group of hikers kind of straggled past. And not long after that, I came upon them milling around. And they, I started hearing them say, hiker coming through, and they sort of parted on either side of the trail, and I just kept hiking, and two of them had also gone ahead, and I got about a quarter of a mile, probably a little more than a quarter of a mile down the trail, and I heard two people ahead of me say, oh, is this Papoose Lake? And I said, let me look at my map, and I looked, and something was wrong. I said, are you on the John Muir Trail? And they said, oh no, we're going over Goodale Pass. So I had to backtrack back to where that group of hikers had been, and it turned out they were all milling around right in front of the trail intersection and the sign. And their hike leader actually apologized to me for what had happened. So at this point, it was also getting kind of thundery, and it was probably one of the few moments in the trip where I thought, "You got to be kidding me." So I continued on up, still had this rumbling, not really loud thunder, but there was definitely some thunderiness going on. And I continued on up to the pass, and I was like, should I really be doing this? But I forged ahead, and I really hurried right over that pass. And if there was a view, I'm not sure I saw all of it. And going down that trail, it really became increasingly steep and rough. And you can see that this was a really rough trail. I was tired. I was also mentally tired. And so I was really happy to come upon a section of trail that just had these beautiful flowers. And that's what I used to distract myself from my fatigue. And finally coming to a really lovely campsite where I set up my tent and immediately fell asleep. And then the next day, I was so curious about the next day because I had to descend the trail to one of the trail's low points at 7,900 feet was Lake Edison Junction. And some people go to Lake Edison. It's very popular. There's a resort there. You can take a ferry, but it wasn't running because of low water to go to this resort where the young crowd kind of hangs out. But I chose to take the regular trail, stay on the regular trail. And people had talked about this 2,000-foot climb up Bear Ridge like it was, a death march. And so I was a little bit intimidated, I have to admit. But what I found was a really lovely trail. It was largely in the shade. It had lots of broad switchbacks, and you just kind of meandered up the thing, and I enjoyed it completely. And then you had these beautiful trees embracing each other. I mean, what's not to like? So the hike up Selden Pass the next day was just a lovely hike. It wasn't difficult. It was a really nice section of trail. And it was really one of the easier passes. And one of the things that I was thinking about when I took pictures is both taking pictures and as I hiked is that very often we get kind of stuck on the dramatic scenery and we forget these really lovely quiet places along the trail that are equally nice in their own way. And so I took a lot of these pictures of just calm, quiet moments. This was a sign that I saw many times as I went up and down. You couldn't have fires above 10,000 feet. And there were even sections of trail that looked like they'd been freshly tiled. I couldn't believe this section of trail. It was just so beautiful. What was on the tread underneath.
Yeah,
me.
there's some sort of interference, and I'm not sure if it goes over into them. So
Unemployment already done? So finished?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Annette and Stan, we're here. Thank you for muting.
And then so this is again, this is the lake near just below Selden Pass. And going over rock where you can see, if you look carefully, you can see where the rocks mark the trail. But you had to pay attention in those sections because it was really easy to just keep going ahead and not realizing, oh, the trail went a different way. And then I went down, descended in between the Sally Keys lakes, which are beautiful lakes. My understanding is in early summer, they're just bug city and not a great place to camp. But when I was there, they were absolutely beautiful. And continued on down. Whoops. Oops, something just happened. Continued on down to Muir Trail Ranch, where I arrived in the mid-afternoon, and I was feeling a little tired, But my feeling of fatigue subsided after I had a nice relaxed lunch, and I was able to reorganize my resupply that was waiting for me at Muir Trail Ranch. And I was sufficiently revived that I decided to push on and get in a few more miles before calling it a day. But at that point, I also knew that it was time for a couple of short days. And that was something that I learned last summer on the long trail about the importance of taking rest time when you need it. So the next day was a shorter day. Just before I get there, you can see this is a cardboard sign. This is a federal sign printed on cardboard. Welcome to Kings Canyon National Park, and here are the rules. I thought it was very charming. But it was a pretty easy hike up to McClure Meadow, and following this was a series of beautiful cascades. And I got to McClure Meadow, and I pretty much had the entire place to myself. I don't think there was another tent anywhere near me, but I could just hang out there. I set up camp, and I could just sit there and look out over the meadow, watch the deer, do some laundry, and attempt to get clean. And this was the state of my hands. If there was something that annoyed me during the trip, it was that my hands were never clean. And I'd think I got them clean, and then I would touch my tent or touch my trekking pole, and immediately they were covered with trail dust again. But it was nice to just lie there and sleep and really get ready for what was to come, because I knew at that point that the trail was about to get serious and that there were going to be some high passes coming in the next few days. So I got up early, left McClure Meadow, and my intention was to climb to Wanda Lake, just below Muir Pass, but I was dissuaded by other hikers' reports that there was intense cold and really high wind at Wanda Lake. So I hiked past Evolution Lake, which you see here, and I went up I went about halfway to Wanda Lake and stopped at Sapphire Lake. And I spent about an hour and a half there trying to set up my tent. I tried several different configurations in different spots, and I had this huge windbreak that I built. I piled up all these rocks, but even with all of that, there was so much wind coming across the lake that I was really worried that my tent was going to get torn or that my trekking poles were going to break, and that was what I needed to hold up the tent. And so I just threw it all right back in my pack, and I descended and went back to Evolution Lake. And it was the best decision I made the whole time I was on the trail. I found a great site, and not long after that, Allie showed up. She and Jake and Sky over the next couple of hours all showed up, and all of us had been planning to go up to Wanda Lake, but after they heard what I had experienced at Sapphire Lake, we decided we were all going to stay there. And we had the best afternoon and evening. There were coyotes. This was while we were eating our dinner. There were coyotes up in these peaks, and they were howling back and forth to each other. And then at a certain point, they all came together. It was really great, and beautiful, beautiful sunset. And then I had been hoping for an alpenglow. I finally went to bed, and lo and behold, there was an alpenglow. So they came to my tent, and they dragged me out of my tent and said, okay, you need to get up and see the alpenglow. So the next morning we made the climb up to Muir Pass very early, and this is so gorgeous. And this brought us to the Muir Hut, which is such a cool little place. It's beautiful inside, and we ate a very leisurely breakfast there. We really hung out for a long time before descending the amazingly beautiful south side. This was just such a gorgeous day, and we were very lucky. We had beautiful, beautiful clear skies that day. And along the trail in the afternoon, Well, this is coming down. You can see the others are behind me. They're in the very middle of the picture, and you can see how big everything is by how small they are. And then going down the trail, just before we got to the place we were going to camp, there's the infamous monster or man-eating rock. So of course we had to stop for the photo op. So day 13, you know, when we think of the number 13, and it's a lot of people think of it as being a little bit unlucky. Well, I felt a little bit like there was something demonic about day 13. It was arduous. The whole day was arduous. There was a lot of smoke in the air, and it made the hot climb. Here's a picture where I was actually trying to figure out where were we going to go to get up to these, below these peaks up in the picture, the top of the picture. And it made the hot climb up what's called the Golden Staircase even harder. And so I expected, hiking along, and I thought, well, we're going to get up to the first Palisade Lake, and then the trail's going to level off. Well, I was really wrong. To get around the lakes, you had to go climb up even higher. And I can't remember what I muttered to someone about, you know, what I thought of the people who'd built this trail. They were not kind words. But we got to a really nice campsite with this great stream. It had this great pool where we could just soak for the afternoon. And by dinner time, we were feeling really emboldened, and we decided that the next day we would tackle not one, but we would tackle two 12,000-foot passes. So we left camp in the dark and made our way up Mather Pass, another beautiful breakfast spot. This is looking back at Mather Pass where we had just come down. We moved right along, we crossed over the South Fork and began the climb towards Pinchot Pass. And, you know, we're going steadily up, and I continued to hum 99 bottles of beer on the wall as I was trying to get up some of these steeper sections as we made our way to Lake Marjorie. And we got to Lake Marjorie, and we needed to get some more water, things like that. But I looked around and I thought, oh, okay, we must be really close to the pass. We're doing well. And was I ever wrong? So my three companions, the trail went in a completely different way than I had expected. My three companions, they scurried on ahead, and I could see them up at the pass, and I just gasped my way up that pass. And we finally got to the top, or I got to the top, but you can tell who the tired person is in this picture. That's me in the back. They've all been hanging around and resting for about 40 minutes while I continued making my way up there. And then we had to descend quite a ways to get to a place to camp, because to just get to a viable place where we could camp. It was a nice descent, but we were all pretty beat. But we found this beautiful little lake, and seeing my favorite magenta paintbrush just told me we have found the perfect spot. I love magenta paintbrushes. They just make me completely happy. So by now we'd kind of established a roadmap for the last week. We were feeling pretty certain that we could finish the trail in about another 6 days. And so we moved on pretty steadily. This is the only suspension bridge that I encountered on the trail. It was the wobbliest suspension bridge I've ever been on. Interesting. So we went from lake to lake. This is just, and that's what you do. You just go up, there's just one beautiful lake after another. And then from Ray Lakes up over Glen Pass, a very rough trail, but stellar. Just, you know, if you want to stop and rest, there's so much to look at. And then we got to the top, or I got to the top. I was alone at this point, and I saw a slot in the rocks, and I thought, oh, that's where the trail goes down. because the trail, I don't know, maybe I just wasn't looking very well. So I started down this trail and I thought, boy, this is kind of a 5-3 rock move. I'm surprised the trail does this. And how did they get down it with the horses? So I got down probably about 25 feet and then I couldn't go any further. And I thought, oh. And then I looked off to my right. I started moving. I was on kind of this shelf. And I went along to the right and it went over this little hump. And there was the trail. So I had completely missed the right way to come down. But I did survive to tell the tale. And this is looking back where I had come down. And this was Charlotte Lake. So Charlotte Lake was one of the places for me in planning this trip that was a little nerve-wracking because I was scheduled actually to meet a horse packer who was bringing in my last resupply. And so I knew I had to be there on a certain day. Now, the good thing was that I was a day ahead, so that concern had somewhat been removed. And Jake and Sky also had resupplies coming in with a friend who they'd paid to hike it in. So I got to Charlotte Lake a day ahead of schedule, and it was kind of, I was feeling, well, this is too bad. I'm going to have to wait around an extra day to pick up my resupply. But then I went to the ranger station, and lo and behold, the packer had brought in my resupply a day early because the group I had signed on with to get an economical way of bringing in a resupply, everybody else, there were 5 other hikers that were supposed to be sending in resupplies at the same time as me. All 5 people had quit the trail. And so they had put my pack in with another group that had come in earlier. Very lucky. So Charlotte Lake was the point where we actually, as we were leaving, really encountered a lot of smoke. When we woke up in the morning, it was really smoky, and we even had some ash on our tents that night. And this was, I think, the result of the fires at Tahoe, and the wind was moving in just the right direction. So let's see, we were really feeling really psyched because we wanted to get to just the right place below Forester Pass, found a beautiful place. It even had little cairns that marked the way down to the stream to get water. But we were perfectly positioned to go over Forester Pass, which was the highest of the passes, over 13,000 feet. And that morning, so the morning that we left to go up, again, we left just the first light. This was my favorite morning of the entire trip. We just went up the pass and the sun rose along with us. And it was just such a gorgeous morning. (13,200 feet, great place to have breakfast. And then we started down the other side. We made our way down and over down the valley, or I guess you'd call it a valley, and over the very windy Bighorn Plateau. And then we dropped down to a lovely wooded site at a trail junction. And that was beside a really large creek. And this was a really busy trail junction. There were a lot of tents there, but it was remarkably quiet. People were being very respectful. It was unusual to be camped in a place so with a whole lot of other people. And the next day was a really relaxed hike, beautiful, beautiful trail, and hiking along and then seeing that sign that Mount Whitney was only 8.3 miles away. It was, you know, after so many days on the trail, and there was such a rhythm to the day, and it just seemed both kind of real and surreal that this whole trek was about to come to an end. So I arrived at Guitar Lake, which you can, even from this vantage point, you can see why it's called Guitar Lake. Everybody who's going to climb Mount Whitney who's been backpacking, this is where everybody camps. I actually found hiked a little bit further up beside this nice tarn, And it was slightly windy up there, but there were always great rocks to use to set up my tent because there was no way you were going to get a stake into that ground. Um, and I was able to spend the afternoon sleeping and wandering around. Sleep is a big ingredient when you're doing a through hike. Needless to say, there wasn't a lot of sleep that last night. The coyotes were howling at sunset, and I thought, well, this is kind of appropriate somehow. They're bidding me farewell. But I got up at 12:30 because I thought, well, I'm going to be really slow, and I don't want to keep everybody else waiting because Jake and Sky wanted to be up there for sunrise. So I thought, okay, I'll start up the mountain. And I hiked on with my headlamp, and I got up really quite far up. And then all of a sudden, I had this moment where my confidence completely left me. I realized I knew that the trail was just dropping off beside me, and all I could see was blackness. And I just thought, I'm not feeling good about this. And I could see two little lights, and I thought that was Jake and Sky. I just decided I'm sitting down on a rock until someone else starts up this trail. I am all alone on this mountain. So these other two guys came past me, and it was just remarkable. Knowing that there were two other humans ahead of me, I was able to just pick myself up and keep going. And then you get to a trail intersection where you have to decide if you're actually going to go up to the summit. And I waited there a little while, and Jake and Sky came, and I was really glad because at that point I led part of the way, and then we got into a lot of rock scrambling in the dark. And again, I was, I'm not so sure about this, and I actually asked them to go ahead of me, but to keep me in proximity. And it was it just added to my feeling of security. I mean, I think it also, being that high up in the mountain, I think there were a lot of factors going on that made me feel I really need to have another person around right now. And we got up to the summit. And what I did, it was probably about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I get out my sleeping bag, and there's a shelter up at the top, and there were a whole bunch of people in there. And they made room for me, and I kind of curled up in my sleeping bag, and I went back to sleep. And then someone came to the door and said, oh, the sun's coming up. And at that point, I was like, no, big deal, the sun's coming up, because I was so tired. But I did get up, and I went outside very briefly, and it was so intensely cold that when I tried to take a picture, this is the best picture that I got. My hands were, I was shivering and my hands were shaking. And so I kind of gave up. And, Sky took my obligatory picture on the top of Mount Whitney to prove that I'd been there. It's really great. They have, I think, 3 or 4 different signs lying on the rock, and you can choose which one you're going to pose with. And then we headed down. And this is just such a beautiful view back to the mountain. So then there was an 8-mile descent with its 99 switchbacks, and it started out extremely cold, but within an hour the temperature had shot up and you were shedding all those layers. And the last few miles of that hot trail, they seemed interminable, and there were the usual feelings, of sadness and excitement that come at the end of any adventure. But finally there was Whitney Portal with its store, and I could get a big cup of real lemonade and could sit there and was able to hitch a ride into town very easily with people that I had actually been on the trail with a few days before. So that was the end of the hike. And I just thought I'd share a few takeaways from this, actually from the hikes that I've done over the last few summers. One is when you get into planning a trip like that, there are so many people coming at you and offering advice and telling you what to do, and you're hearing about, oh, you can do this in 18 days, or hike 20 miles a day. All the good hikers hike 25 miles a day, and you just have to tune all of that out. You have to hike your own hike. You'll enjoy it a whole lot more. And you can't be swayed or intimidated by all the blah blah that you hear on the internet. People are talking about food. You should eat this or not eat that. or how many miles a day you should be going, or you should be carrying ultralight gear, or you should be wearing these clothes and not those clothes. You know, I just think you have to say, well, this is interesting information, but you have to figure out what works for you. The other thing is do your homework. Lots of good resources. I just thought the amount of time that I spent looking at maps, reading the trail guide was so helpful. Don't get freaked out by postings on Facebook. So there's a John Muir Trail group. There's Ladies of the John Muir Trail. But what happened to me, sometimes there was some really good information that got communicated. That's the way I found the pack party for my last resupply, things like that. I got some information about a bus at the end of my trip. But I also finally had to stop looking at it because there were people who were getting kind of freaked out and worrying about this and worrying about that. And I found that I was taking on their anxiety, and that I began to question my own competence. And I finally thought, I know how to do this. I've got to stop hearing all this other stuff. And finally, as someone who's done a lot of solo hiking, I will tell you, I feel that women are safe on the trail. That's not a universal statement. You need to be careful. You need to know where you're going. You have to have planned. But I've never been intimidated on any of these longer hikes that I've been on. So I just encourage women, whether hiking with other women or they're wanting to hike by themselves, don't be held back by the fact that you are a solo woman. So that's what I have to say.
Yay. Margot, quite a trip. My goodness. And I suspect that there are people who have some questions for you. So I would ask, if people do have questions, maybe you could enter them into the chat and we can send them her way. And I'll kick off with one question, which is, I know you've done some other long hikes before. How would you compare this one, both in terms of length for what you've done before and difficulty?
So last summer I did the long trail, which is actually about 50 miles longer. But the long trail is quite different. First of all, in a lot of respects, the hiking is harder. It's typical New England hiking. You're pulling yourself up on roots. There's a lot more to fall, a lot more places to fall or to slip. But there are also, you cross many roads. So there are many times where you can say, I really need to take a rest day. I actually want to go sleep in a real bed. And that sometimes makes a very big difference. Or if you wanted to pick up your resupply in town and to change around what you were actually putting into your bear bag or your bear canister. So those are the big things I think that changed for me. But they were both great hikes in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And the Wonderland, the other thing, both the JMT and the Long Trail, you could pretty much camp anywhere you wanted, as long as you weren't impacting the environment. You couldn't go camp in the middle of a meadow. But when I did the Wonderland Trail, I did it in 10 days, and it's very constrained because when you apply for your permit, you have to say where you're going to be camping. So you can't deviate from your plan. I think I would have done it in fewer days, but I couldn't because I had to stick kind of to my, my permit. So that was different in that situation.
Well, I'm seeing a lot of fan mail coming in here in the chat. A lot of people commenting on things like, what an amazing adventure. You are so brave. You are an amazing person. Thanks for this excellent and inspiring presentation. We do have some questions though. Adrian was asking, can you get a permit for a group or are they all individual only?
No, when you apply for a permit, you tell how many people are going to be in the group. So there's a lot of flexibility. I don't know if there's a maximum number in the group, but they really give out permits based on the number of people on the trail.
And we have a question or comment from Holly. She says it was
I'm not surprised. Well, I'm not sure. I guess to Holly, I would say that if you call swimming in the lakes kind of the way the albino bears swim at August camp, I swam in a lot of lakes, but they weren't extended swims. A lot of lakes and a lot of creeks.
And I see a question from Greg about how well is the trail marked? How often did you lose the trail?
Well, interestingly enough, the John Muir Trail has no, it's not like the Long Trail or the AT where you have these nice white blazes that you're following. Um, on the JMT, there are no blazes, but the trail is so obvious. And the places that you're most apt to lose the trail is when you're going over bare rock, and there are a lot of rocks lying around, and you really have to watch, okay, where has a lane been created? And there were a couple of times that I started across a rock and then had this moment of, whoa, I don't think I'm on the trail anymore. And you just have to look and kind of backtrack. But it's very easy to follow.
Now, Dave is wondering, did you eat breakfast right away each morning or start hiking first?
It varied. If we were going over a pass, almost always we started hiking first, really wanting to get up the summit to the passes as soon as possible and really enjoy breakfast up there. And sometimes I ate just, a granola bar or something like that in the morning, granola bar and a cup of coffee, and then kind of grazed throughout the morning.
Question from Rita, could you have spent more days on the trail or were you limited by permit?
I could have spent more days on the trail. I think you have up to 25 days to complete the trail. I think that's what it is. I don't know what it's going to be with the new permitting process, how that's going to change. No one's asking you for your, although I will say actually, at probably 3 different points along the trail, a ranger did ask me to show my permit. So they were keeping track somewhat. But then towards the end of the trail, there was really nobody checking anything.
I see a comment from Jinzu saying that it's very inspiring and thanks for confirming that solo hiking is reasonably safe. I'm sure it's a question that a lot of people have had. I had a question. Have you stayed in touch with your tramily?
Somewhat, yeah. Well, I've stayed in touch with Jake and Sky, so I'm kind of aware of what they're doing. It's so interesting. Actually, I've lost my temporary tattoo last week when I was having some lab work done. They pulled off the tape and they destroyed my temporary tattoo because Jake and Sky had these beautiful tattoos. I'm never going to be a person who's going to get tattooed, but I thought, wow, those are really pretty, and I'm going to start having more temporary tattoos. Never too old,
As long as they're temporary, yeah. I see a question from Rita asking, did you bring a water purifier?
Yes, it's absolutely essential to have a filter purifying system. That was part of the routine every morning, every night was, and I used the Sawyer bag system. Just, you get the water in it and roll it up. Some people don't like them. They've had the bags break, which did happen to me 2 years ago, but I've kind of got a new technique that works well. And I also carry I carry my Camelback, but then I have a 1 liter, just a 1 liter, seltzer bottle that I use to carry extra water. And that's also really helpful in my purifying system when I'm getting water out of a stream.
I'm not seeing a lot of other questions coming in at this point. Oh, wait a minute, here comes, how did you recharge your devices such as GPS tracker or headlamp?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. That was actually one of my heaviest things because I actually took 2 of the small chargers, and had gotten really good last year at rationing the amount that I used. So my phone was always in a dark mode, in airplane mode. I really used it only for taking pictures because there was no cover. You couldn't get any reception anyway. And then I had my Kindle, and I also carried a Garmin InReach, which for the most part would have gone the whole trip. I think I charged it up once during the trip just to top it out. But those two devices made it exactly 3 weeks to the end of the trail.
And here's a big question from Dave. How much did your pack weigh?
Well, I think my pack weighed about 30 pounds based on what I knew I was doing in my training hikes. At Muir Trail Ranch, there's kind of an infamous set of scales where people pick up their resupplies and then they take bets on how much the pack actually weighs. But I refused to weigh my pack. It was whatever was in it, and I didn't want to be psyched out by, oh my God, it now weighs 34 pounds, and that's going to make my trip even harder. But I'm pretty sure I would say it was somewhere between 28 and 31 or 32 pounds.
I see Peter's writing in, there was an amazing trip. Were you able to adjust to the high elevations without stopping to catch your breath?
Well, Peter, if you had seen me going up Pinchot Pass, you would have said that I was having a really hard time. It definitely, I think historically, when I have been anywhere where I go past about 10.5, that's the point where I start to notice a difference. But definitely being up high pretty consistently made a difference. But once I got up to 12,000 feet, I mean, doing two 12,000 foot peaks in one day was kind of a stretch. The first one wasn't a big deal. The second one was really hard, and that was definitely the altitude.
From Rita, knowing what you now know, what would you do differently if you did the trail again?
I'm not really sure I'd do anything differently. When I think back to my long trail hike, there are definitely some things that I do differently, but I don't know if I'd do anything differently. It makes such a difference when you start a hike and then you encounter 3 people who become kind of reliable companions. We didn't hike together all day, every day, but we'd get back together in the evening, things like that. And that was really nice, but it also wasn't a big problem if then we didn't see each other for a few days. But you never know if that's going to happen. This could have been a very different hike if I'd been all by myself for the entire trip. So there are all kinds of variables that are hard to know when you set out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it was certainly an amazing adventure. And I would agree with everyone who is talking about how impressive you are and the fact that you were able to do this in such great style. And we certainly appreciate your sharing this with us this evening. Phil? Yeah.
Yes, I too would say hats off and really enjoyed your photography. Some of those lake pictures with the reflection were absolutely spectacular. And I agree with you. Yes, the great big expanse, but also those little areas, nice calm areas. Yeah, we shouldn't forget to enjoy them and also photograph them.
Yeah. I will say that was one thing that was disappointing. My actual camera that I had with me, the lens cap just isn't quite tight, and there was so much dust that after a few days, I could no longer use it. So I was using only my phone.
Thank you very much, Margot.
Thank you.
And yes, hopefully I'll either put a program together of a previous trip or when you go again, let Lenny and I know. We'd love to have you back.
Okay,
And
thank you very much.
you're welcome. And next month, enjoy your time with family, friends, etc. And then in January, the new year, John Rogers, third Wednesday, January 19th. John, are you still on here?
You're on mute, John. Still muted. I'm not sure that he can unmute.
Okay, well, John
Oh, John, wave at everybody.
John is going to take us to France next year.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, John, tell us about what's going to happen. Third.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute myself there, by the way. Yeah, we'll take a walk on the Way of St. James in South Central and Southwest France over about 6 weeks and 480 miles or so. And we'll start in a small city called Le Puy and finish at Saint Jean Pied de Port in the Pyrenees.
Thank you, and we're looking forward to that also. And like I will say, have a very happy Thanksgiving and a very Merry Christmas and holiday season. Lenny, is there anything else we need to discuss for the good of the order of the meeting?
No, I don't think so. We'll just tell people to stay tuned and find out whether we are in real time or in Zoom time or a combination of thereof. But we'll hope to see you one way or another come January.
And obviously, see you all out on the trail somewhere.
Yes. Thanks for joining us tonight.